Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, hope you're doing well. Okay, let's do a quick recap of week 13 of the marathon train so far. Week 13 is also the second week of the 4-week race preparation train block. Okay, so Monday's just the usual 10 kilometers of recovery on grass. It does seem a bit repetitive after all this time, but I'm not too fussed because it's just part of the train routine for now, and I'm still quite grateful to have a grass field near my place. Tuesday was some intervals at the Salt Pan Creek Reserve. It was 6 by 1 kilometer with about 100 seconds of dog recovery. The program does say recovery should be between like 50 to 90% of your interval duration, but I'm not too strict on the interval pace at the moment. It did end up being about 320 to 325 minutes per kilometer, but there's a bit of uphill and downhill either way, so it's not too controlled. I wasn't too drained for this interval session by any means, but maybe I could try extend the recovery duration to 2 minutes or a bit more next time and see how it goes, I guess. Wednesday was a 24 kilometer medium long run. This time I felt like exploring a bit of the local streets of Padstow Heights rather than doing my usual loops around Salt Pan Creek Reserve. It's sort of a nice break from doing the usual loops, but I'm always reminded and humbled by how hilly some of the streets can be, but it's all good. Thursday was another 10 kilometers recovery on grass at Bankstown City Sports Complex. Slightly wet grass as always, but yeah, no dramas really. Friday was a 19 kilometer medium long run. I did along Riverwood and M5 Linear Park. Again, a nice little break from doing the usual loops at Salt Pan Creek Reserve. I felt pretty solid here, but I might need to switch to a fresher white pair of speeds for the medium long runs since the red speeds were approaching around 700 kilometers of running mileage in them. They don't feel that bad, but they're certainly worn out a fair bit, and I probably shouldn't be stingy with shoes at this late stage of the marathon training. Saturday was supposed to be 11 kilometers of recovery. I think there was some like heavy rain forecasted for Saturday, but luckily it didn't happen till later afternoon, so I was able to go to Rhodes Parkrun as usual. I got it done mostly with Colin and Abdul this time, although Abdul absolutely flew off for the final kilometer. Anyways, it was a fairly controlled effort overall. I only managed about 9 kilometers in total, but yeah, but I should be fine. And then finally, Sunday was a 32 kilometer long run with 23 kilometers at goal marathon pace. This was the 4th and final big goal marathon pace workout in the whole train plan, so it was a good time to really practice the race effort, the gear, the course profile, and so on. Since it rained very heavily for like a big part of the day and night before, practically torrential wind and rain, I didn't feel like doing the long run along my usual routes as they're probably slightly flooded or quite messy. Plus, I wanted to go somewhere a bit flatter this time, so I ended up going to Rhodes instead to basically get it done along the Rhodes Park Run and Rhodes Foreshore route, which is about a 6 kilometer loop. I've been there a bunch of times after wet weather, and that whole area tends to hold up fairly well, I guess. I also wanted to save a bit of effort for the run, so I just drove to Rhodes instead of running there like I usually do. But unfortunately, I forgot to bring my soft flask. I'm usually better prepared when I run from my place, but it's alright. I also wore my Vaporfly Freeze this time to see how it feels on like a long run, especially at goal marathon pace as well. It was fairly comfortable for the previous week's 5k time trial and park run, but I was keen to see how it felt for like a long run, since I didn't want to make the same mistake of not testing my race shoe like last year for Sydney Marathon, I guess. The other thing I was missing was probably gels. I didn't think I'd need it, and it turns out I didn't, but I think I should at least practice taking some gels. There's a few long runs left in the following weeks to get it done, I guess. Anyways, in terms of the run, the plan was to do 9k warm-up first. As part of the warm-up, I got in a quick toilet break and then fixed the lacing a bit since it felt quite tight around my ankle. Unfortunately, the lace bite just got worse for the rest of the run, so yeah, I didn't really fix anything, I guess. Finally got some water at the bubblers and then got stuck into the 23 kilometers at goal marathon pace straight away. Weather-wise, it was cloudy and fairly cool, if not a bit cold, but super windy as well. This meant I didn't sweat too much throughout the run, which is great, but it made pacing it a bit tricky, especially along the foreshore. The surfaces were a bit wet and puddly as well, but the Vaporflies held up well enough in terms of traction. I tried my best to stay focused throughout and not overdo it, and go at what I thought would be goal marathon pace in terms of effort. Against the headwinds and doing a slight bit of uphills along the way, I just slowed down a tiny bit, and whenever there was like tailwinds or slight downhill sections, I was mostly careful not to get too carried away. I did lose a bit of confidence by not having my soft flask on me for water, but I just reminded myself that when it comes to the actual marathon race, I'll likely be much more prepared in terms of like fueling, since I'll be carrying some gels and there'll be on-course drink stations as well. Overall, I ended up getting through the long run quite strongly without overcooking myself, and also felt like I had plenty left in the tank, and even managed to get like a half marathon PB of about 1 hour and 18 to 19 minutes as well, which was kind of unexpected, but then again, I haven't really raced half marathons that much, so that was definitely a massive confidence booster. In terms of the Vaporflies, they held up quite well and carried me through it the whole way, but I will say the ankle lace bite sensation was pretty bad afterwards. Even though I was able to mostly ignore the growing discomfort there throughout the run, I really should have tried adjusting it at least once more during the warm-up phase, I guess. I'm glad to say I didn't get any numb toes either. However, the shoes felt very slappy and close to the ground. I think it's just the way I run. Maybe I run a bit heavily or something, so it doesn't feel like it's pampering or like protecting my feet, but it's probably not that big of a deal for me personally. At least it felt lightweight, nimble, and mostly comfortable throughout. And then finally, I caught up with OPIC afterwards. They finished both their group long runs a bit before me and were like kind enough to like wait a bit longer so I could like join the group photo, so that was very much appreciated, I guess. Anyways, the total mileage for week 13 was about 119 kilometers. Overall, a solid week, especially given the luck in terms of the weather. I was able to get in 2 medium long runs, and then the Sunday long run ticked off, so that was definitely a confidence booster moving forward. I'm glad I was able to get that long run in this time and see where I stand in terms of fitness and confidence at this stage of the training, plus test the potential race shoes as well, compared to last year where I didn't and ended up only doing city surf rather than the Gold Marathon Pace long run. Although I don't regret that at all, as I really enjoyed my time out there last year. Anyways, let's quickly talk about tracking progress and fitness leading up to race day, I guess. Especially since I've been approaching this whole training without too much of a specific time goal for the marathon race. I guess firstly I want to talk about how I feel throughout training, especially since I'm mostly run by feel. So one of the elements is like how I feel for the day and from the previous days as well. So for example, whether I'm sick, like have a higher heart rate than normal, have stress, some life changes or factors, seasonal changes, weather, and so on. In those kind of scenarios, I'd probably adjust my effort and expectations accordingly. As I progress through the weeks and like the body adjusting and gets used to what's required as part of training, I sort of have an idea of what I should feel and expect with a certain type of prescribed run, given the circumstances. Personally, I feel that as long as the effort is mostly on point or at least adjusted accordingly, I'm not too fussed about the output. For example, I can expect a run on a rain day to be slightly slower than a usual dry weather run of similar distance, terrain, and so on, assuming that the same effort level, and it should be fine on paper. There's also how I feel per run, or at least like type of run, keeping in mind and remembering the purpose. Like of course this depends on the training program. Throughout this whole training I have like recovery, general aerobic, medium long runs, Gold Marathon Pace long runs, lactate threshold, VO2 Max interval workouts, speed workouts, and also tune-up races. And again, the idea is to really remember the purpose of each run. For example, recovery runs are my slowest runs. They're very chilled, very relaxed. They're literally for recovery purposes. And though they might not always feel super easy, especially if it's on the Monday, which is like the day after like a long run on Sunday, it should still be done at a fairly chill effort anyway. I guess how fitness feels might depend on the day of week. For example, I'm so used to like Monday recoveries or like Saturday recoveries, but when it comes to Sunday, I usually feel prepared for like a solid long run. If you ask me to race or do like a long run on Monday or like a Saturday, I'd probably underperform since I'm so used to like a certain type of run for those days, which is the recovery day. But when it comes to Sunday, it's all good. I do think training has been fairly conservative for me. I don't think there's many days in training where, even though I feel relatively fresh or good for the day, that I push it more than I'm used to or like feel the need to. I don't think I've reached a stage where I look back and feel like maybe I should have pushed it harder during those recovery days, or like push my heart rate a bit more during the medium long runs. Usually it's more like, I got those runs in and like, felt decent at the end, so it's all good, I guess. I guess balancing training load is quite tricky because progress isn't really linear, and there's often like a fine line between increasing fitness and like overtraining. Sometimes it helps to look at the bigger picture of training, like plan ahead a bit and like anticipate where things might get a bit tough or where the recovery weeks are, for example. So in terms of periodization, I guess it's important to remind yourself and remember the purpose of each training block. And of course this depends on like your training, your program. But as you progress in training, it's good to sometimes review and like acknowledge how you feel throughout the weeks relative to where you are in the whole training block. For example, in the context of this whole 18-week training program, we had the first 6 weeks as an endurance training block, I guess where the focus is on base building. Sometimes I look back and feel like it's more like getting thrown in the deep end, to be honest. Like for example, 2 medium long runs and then another long run throughout the week, and on top of that there's continuous threshold runs as well. And usually how we feel with this block is that things are ramping up and it is to get used to like the gradually increasing mileage and training volume. However, most days should feel quite predictable for the most part. There's nothing too crazy or special going on yet. It's just solid base building. But then we have the next 5 weeks, which is the lactate threshold and endurance training block, where we're still continuing to try and close the gap between lactate threshold and marathon pace on top of base building, I guess. So with this block, I'm still getting more used to the higher mileage and things will get a bit tougher, but should be still manageable and predictable. And then we had the 4-week race preparation block, where I guess the aim is to build race experience during these high mileage weeks. And here's where I usually feel quite fit for the tune races, given that I started to do interval workouts. However, I tend to keep in mind that a solid performance or outcome of like a tune-up race isn't quite guaranteed due to the fact that we're still running on like tired legs and high mileage, and the focus should still be on being able to hit those usual workouts and long runs anyway. And then finally the 3 weeks taper, that's where we gradually reduce the volume but mostly maintain the intensity to be as fresh and fit as possible by race day. I think the taper block is quite tricky because technically there's not much fitness loss during those 3 weeks, at least on a physical level, I guess. But honestly, it's not that easy to be certain in your maintained fitness and supposedly increasing freshness leading up to the race day. I guess the focus should be like, as long as there's no injury, you're not feeling sick and so on, you should be mostly good to go by race day. Of course, on top of the other small things to deal with like nutrition, sleep, recovery, and so on. Anyways, on a different note, we also have like watch data and analytics for like tracking progress, I guess. So firstly, I use a Garmin watch, so I'm with the Garmin platform ecosystem. Garmin has a little feature called Race Predictor. It sort of predicts your 5k, 10k, half and full marathon race times based on like recent training activity and other data that it kind of tracks on day-to-day basis, like your sleep and heart rate, for example. So I'm just looking through the Race Predictor screen right now. It's not entirely accurate to how I performed it or even like felt throughout these weeks. For example, on the 1st and 2nd of June, it was predicting that I could run these times: 17:26 for 5k, 36:46 for the 10k, 121 for the half, 255 for the full. And then on Sunday where I did the goal marathon pace long run, I ran like 118 for the half. Even the old data from like last year's training or even like the years before that, I don't think it's been quite accurate or like close to how I felt during my training. I'm not too sure how it's calculated. If it factors in like sleep and heart rate, which is often inaccurate, then yeah, the race prediction data might also be inaccurate as a result. And the other thing is my Garmin watch is like relatively old now. It's the Garmin Forerunner 245, which I think came out over 5 years ago. I'm guessing that new watches might be more accurate for this kind of data. It probably has better algorithms and like learns better from your training runs than this older watch, I guess. Personally, I just take it at face value. Not really a definitive like predictor or indicator of my fitness at any given point. The other one is VO2 Max. That's also another data metric available in my Garmin watch as well. And just having a look through it during my marathon training, it looks like it trended mostly down throughout the whole 18 weeks. I'm not too surprised though, because most of the training doesn't really revolve around VO2 Max. To really increase and push your VO2 Max, you gotta do those pretty hard interval workouts, which as part of 18 weeks of training, we don't get prescribed that many intervals and it only starts at week 10. And I'm not too sure how accurate it is either. Again, older watch, who knows. There's also another one called training load. I haven't really looked into too much, but yeah, the numbers are kind of arbitrary. I'm not too sure how it's calculated. It does increase when there's more workouts involved throughout the week, and then it sort of decreases during the recovery weeks, for example, or where there's weeks with like less workouts, and it even decreases even more during taper. There's also training status, and for example, there's like overreaching, peaking, productive, maintaining, recovery, strain, unproductive, detrain, no status, and paused. It says like it's based on like your VO2 Max, your HRV status, and like acute chain load. Oftentimes it tells me I'm unproductive. I haven't seen it say overtraining for me personally. I might have seen it say peaking and like maintaining or recovery a few times as well. Like, it's still a suggestion based on like what it knows for all the metrics and data tracking it does. always take it at face value anyway. Then we also have like VDOT calculators, equivalent tables, and like similar calculators. So you sort of just like plug in a recent race performance and it will suggest like train paces and other equivalent race performances. There's definitely solid science involved and it's quite useful, but I'd still take it with a grain of salt. I think it's probably not super accurate if you don't race often or like overperform in training or even like underperform in a recent race. The other thing is it's probably calculated for like running on flat surfaces with no humidity, no winds, and so on. So unless you do all your runs on the track in like perfect conditions, you probably need to adjust it according to where you run, whether that's different surfaces, elevations, gradients, temperature, humidity, and so on. It might also be risky to increase the train paces right after a race, especially in the middle or late into a marathon train block. It might be better to acknowledge that whatever you've been doing so far has been working well, and if the performance was less than desired, maybe we need to see why and adjust our expectations accordingly, especially with how far into the train block you may be. For example, some of my tune-up races haven't gone too well in my eyes, where I feel like I've underperformed, faded, or simply lost focus, but most of them were still technically PBs anyway, and didn't impact the overall training or main goal of the marathon too much. Personally, I found that paces and effort improved as training progressed, but it's not like I just ran harder. It's more like I got fitter and stronger, and then maintained more or less the same effort, and turns out that results in like being quicker. The longest run I did in this whole training program was maybe 35Ks in one go, and then 37Ks in the form of like a 27K long run first, and then like a 10K race afterwards. And then the longest goal marathon pace was probably the 23km at goal marathon pace, 29 kilometers in total including the warm-up. None of the runs I've done in training are close in distance or effort with the full marathon distance of like 42.2 kilometers. I think there's always going to be some unknown element going into the actual race, and in a way that makes things a bit tricky but also interesting to find out. And some of the other learnings that I've had from all this marathon training so far is that I feel like the more you discover new things, do trial and error, and like cover your bases as part of training, the higher chances of training success, even if it's only slightly higher. It's all part of experience and applying the learnings as you go. For example, more focus on strength training, better fueling, even stuff like new gear. Another one could be like better routes for training. So it's often those little things that help you feel like you can run better and therefore faster and further. Cumulative effort is what I tend to focus on. As long as most of the runs go well, the runs that don't go well probably won't affect your overall fitness and progress that much. Personally, I feel like it's better to be conservative and complete your workouts while having like a bunch left in the tank and feeling good at the end and for the day after, rather than straddling that fine line between like progress and overtraining. Of course, this isn't easy, especially if you're like me, just following a program from like a book, but that's why it's important to like listen to your body and adjust your training as you go. Also, I'd say it's okay to expect some training days not to go well. Personally, I didn't really miss any days of running for the entire train block, though I did have to like modify or like move around some days. But it's like, if I missed a Sunday long run, I'd be quite okay with not making up for it and just continuing on the next day, which is the typical Monday recovery run, for example. I'm definitely not gonna run harder during the following weeks as a result of like missing one day. Of course it sucks and it's often like a hit to our confidence, but it's also important to like just look at the bigger picture and just keep moving forward, I guess. Oftentimes it's about getting most of the work and training done within reason, aiming to stay mostly injury free, taking care of yourself outside of running, trusting and enjoying the whole process, and just believing in yourself. There's so many factors that influence your progress and different indicators and ways of measuring it, and also how you feel and perform. It's not always going to be upwards and positive either. Throughout the entire marathon train block, there will definitely be runs or weeks where you may feel solid or great, and others where things feel tough and you're unsure whether things are tracking well, I feel like as long as you're getting things done and having fun for the most part, it should be alright. I think that's just how training is, and it keeps things interesting, I guess. Anyways, I hope any of this has been helpful in some kind of way. I really gotta go now, so as usual, thanks for watching and have a nice day. Bye.